So after discussing the dystopian nightmare that we live in, what do we do about it? First, invest heavily into public transit and biking infrastructure. For rail, this involves doing what China did and standardizing trains nationwide so they can be mass-produced as needed instead of being bespoke, and make sure all towns are connected through some form of rail. Some of the Chinese high-speed trains could get you from Chicago to New York in 2.5 hours, not including stops, and we should connect all of the major cities via high-speed rail, and from there, lower speed rail can be used to smaller towns and cities. These trains will of course be electrically powered by wire or rail, and the train track can be powered by sunlight with solar panels all along the route, interconnected to share with the grid as is needed. This also involves actually enforcing the law that gives passenger rails the right of way over freight trains, but since that's never been enforced once, there are 3-mile long trains created to reduce labor costs that can add up to 4 hours to some passenger rail lines. It also reduces much-needed inspections that allowed for the new Palestine bomb trains to crash and explode, and there are between 1,000 to 2,000 freight train derailments per year. Lastly, we need to make maintenance a high priority and baked into our budget. This and only this will prevent our infrastructure from becoming incredibly unsafe and unused for safety. For bus service, we need dedicated bus lanes. Where possible, we should use trolley or tram wire to reduce heavy polluting batteries and then reduce efficiency of the machines. Hybrid trolley buses that have to leave the line for a mile can drive off grid and then get back on the grid and recharge the battery. Electric buses as a final option, and where needed in the short term, diesel buses, as one diesel bus emits way less pollution and greenhouse gases than 30 to 100 EV cars, which is still 1/10 the impacts of many combustion cars. Dedicated bus lanes speed up both lanes of traffic. If buses are frequent enough, can in fact go faster than cars, giving it an edge over cars, making up for all the stops it has to do. Also, cars don't have to try and get around buses when they stop. It would require buses to give up-to-date schedules and arrival times via GPS, which one would assume is normal by app these days, but not true for a surprising number of cities. Buses should also be a bit more luxurious, as less people will associate it with poor people, such as tables and good quality seating. Traffic lights should be set up like they are in the Netherlands, with cyclists and pedestrians getting preferential treatment to cars. This increases their safety and reduces chance of dying. Mandatory free parking spaces should be replaced with bike parking. One car spot can fit all of the bikes most places might need. Even better if they're able to be parked or stored inside. The parking must be in a visible high traffic area to reduce thefts. There are so many places I could physically bike to in my city, but without bike parking in a visible area, I don't trust the bike to be there when I get back. If your city is on a grid, ideally, shut down every 4th street to bikes, pedestrians, and emergency vehicles. If roads aren't contiguous or there are bridges that can't be widened, ensure there is a dedicated protected bike lane. If there isn't a way to shut down streets, create super blocks where the cars are blocked from entering the road between 4 blocks to cars, and ensure great walking and biking experiences. Property values actually rise dramatically in these spaces. Required closed streets with necessary parking to have a speed limit of 15 miles per hour max with traffic calming measures. Every year as the public transit gets better, slowly eliminate parking or increase parking fees to match what they actually cost. Also, adding congestion pricing to cities will increase public transit use. There is no way everyone can own a vehicle in as dense a place as a city and be able to breathe clean air, reducing traffic to only those who need it. Allows slow-speed electric vehicles with a max speed of 20 miles per hour to let people ride on bike streets if they have a disability. Slow-speed vehicles don't even need a lot of expensive safety tests since they don't have to reach speeds that cars do and won't compete with them, so they can be much lighter and more efficient and much more affordable. Every city must treat trees and green spaces as an important utility as water, electricity, or sewer are to reduce the heat island effect, as well as an activity. Eliminate all R1 single-family zoning immediately. Allow multi-story or mixed-use retail buildings everywhere. This won't end the suburbs, but it will stop the need to drive everywhere as more mixed-use buildings get built in the neighborhood, and people can just walk to places nearby. End or drastically reduce minimum lot sizes so people can build more housing on their own land, but also make soundproofing mandatory for all multi-story homes to reduce noise pollution. Of course, all new buildings must also be up to a certain environmental standard as well. While historic neighborhood status can be invoked for a minority of places, at the moment it is horribly abused and NIMBYs freak out about the destruction of the character of their neighborhood, especially if multi-story homes are built. In their head, that means poor people and a drop in property value and an increase in crime. However, after the freakout and construction is complete, pretty much all residents actually prefer or have a neutral opinion on the change if done right. Many are currently at the mercy of HOAs in the suburbs, and ending R1 zoning and cracking down on HOAs that prevent things like urban gardening and solar panels would most likely be welcome to many who would like the freedom to actually do things with their homes as opposed to living in a sterile draconian place just so their kids can go to a nice school. One idea that has been around for more than 100 years is called Georgism, named after Henry George, who designed the tax policy of replacing property tax with land tax based on the value of the land. This would ensure agricultural land would be taxed less, however land in suburban and urban areas would become more expensive. This would encourage densification while at the same time forcing people who own the land to actually actively use it. Adding an extra prefix of eco-Georgism would be to allow private land open to the public and public spaces to have the taxes reduced or waived, especially urban food forests and farming. Someone can own acres of forest so long as people are allowed to freely use it for hiking, camping, and foraging. If not, they have to pay the tax, and if it's worth it to them, they will pay for it. This would fairly pay for all infrastructure, and if it's not being used, it will just be a burden, and they would sell it off to people who would use it for housing or some other purpose. As I mentioned in the first video, a living wage based on the cost of living by county, and of course tied to inflation. Buying something for $11 in Indianapolis would require $25 in Manhattan, and money isn't worth the same everywhere. There is a reason why every rural person I know has some story about people living off welfare and never working, while in the city, people on welfare are barely scraping by, so all the red states believe most of the people on welfare are welfare queens. If someone works in an area, they should be able to afford to live in that area. It would drive businesses to push the local governments for cheaper housing and transit to push the cost of living down so they would have to pay less. It would also draw businesses to smaller towns where wages are lower, but if that business raises cost of living, those workers won't have to lose their buying power. Being able to live near their job would cut down on commuting drastically. Lastly, we need to change how schools are funded, and they should all get the same funding across the board and not based on property value. No other nation does this, and a nation that is rich shouldn't have schools as poor as we have in the US, setting the kids up for failure. A shocking number of schools without air conditioning in Philly alone prevents learning from being efficient at all and should not be allowed to happen. Once parents don't have to pick a school based on location, they won't be forced to live in certain areas, which will drastically reduce car dependency. One really amazing thing about urbanism is that it can convert us to net zero without using a single piece of new future tech. It's a mix of modern and old tech just by drastically wasting so much less and in the process making us all happier and healthier. Yes, this sounds nice, but how do we actually make this happen? Let's discuss this in the next section. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. If you wish to be a part of this project, or want your Solarpunk art displayed discussing any of our main points of focus, please send everything to solarpunkusa@proton.me. There is also a Patreon link for my main channel if you like what I'm doing. For the first section involving community building, this channel will be run directly by myself. After that point, I hope to make this a collaborative project with many people involved, including voice, information, and editing to make this a robust channel that can spread and grow.